Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to another live video on the Ringside View with me, Suyash, on this really bright and sunny afternoon in New Delhi, which is the venue for India's third group game of the FIFA U-17 World Cup against Ghana. It's a little reflective of my mood as well, because let me put this out there first and straight up. Regardless of the result today, the Indian boys have played exceptionally well throughout the tournament. They've surprised quite a few people with their performances, and the game against Ghana is a must-win because for India to stand any chance of qualifying to the next round of the competition, we need to secure the 3 points, which will put us on level terms with Ghana and Colombia as far as points are concerned. It's also contingent on the fact that if USA beats Colombia today by a big margin. So let me just break down the mathematical possibilities of the group so far for you straight up. USA sit on 6 points from 2 games, Colombia sit on 3 points from 2 games, Ghana sit on 3 points from 2 games, and India sit on no points from 2 games. India have a goal difference of -4 right now. So for India to qualify as a second place team in the group today, the USA needs to beat Colombia by a margin of at least 2 goals today, and India need to then go on and beat Ghana by a margin of at least 3 goals today, which places us at second spot in terms of goal difference in the group. We also have a slight chance of qualifying as as one of the 4 best placed third teams in the group. But for that to happen, there are a few more mathematical possibilities that we'll need to take into account, but we'll get to all of that later. So let's just review India's performances in both the group games so far at any level. Jackson Singh with the header, powering it into the back of the net, and scenes at Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium were absolutely, it was a once in a lifetime moment for a lot of people over there, because as well as the Indian team is doing, you don't know when's the next time you're going to see an Indian team in the World Cup, so it was definitely a special moment. Alright, we already have a question from Chinmay. He says, India played better in game 2 vis-a-vis game 1. Was the difference in the opposition or the team just being more comfortable on a stage of this magnitude? Also, do you expect an improvement in game 3 as well? I think the team definitely stepped up, although it's not to say that there aren't any differences in style of play between the USA and Colombia. Like I had mentioned in my previous live video, Colombia were a little more expressive on the ball than the USA, which allowed India to have a little more possession of the ball and play in those spaces as well. Although it's funny that India's goal then eventually came from a set piece, but it's also testament to the fact that we were well organized and we took our chances when we had them. We had a really close chance with Rahul Kanoli Praveen hitting the ball onto the post, and had that gone in and had India taken the lead in that game, Luis Norton Matos had actually said that we'd had a big chance of winning the game. So it was a slight difference in the opposition. It was a slight difference in the fact that India were better prepared to take on Colombia in Colombia in the next game. Now, Luis Norton Matos has himself said a very interesting thing before tomorrow's game. He said that he expects Ghana to be the toughest game of the group for his team, simply because of the fact that Ghana have very expressive players on the ball, and you never know when they might go to the left or when they might go to the right. This might work in favor of India actually, because it would mean that a lot of the Ghanaian players would be leaving their positions and venturing forward. So if India can maintain their shape and organization and actually steal the ball in crucial areas from them, then it'll be way easier for them to hit Ghana on the counter, because they'll then have open spaces to play into, although the Ghanaian players are very, very quick and very, very strong. So it's going to be a tough game. It's going to be the toughest game, but India's up for it. The Indian boys are up for it, and Luis Norton Matos has said that his boys will leave no stone unturned on the pitch, and they'll be assessed before the game, and then a decision will be taken about whether they'll play a part in the game or not. Okay, so we'll pause, and we have a question from Ashama Bhatnagar, who says, regardless of whether India qualifies, would you consider India's efforts in this tournament a success in any way? If yes, what have those successes been? That's a very good question, and the Indian sports-loving public has largely recognized the efforts of this Indian team. I'll go as far as to say it's very rare of the Indian sports-loving public and the general public to see the positives in a loss, but it's been helped by the fact that these are under 17 boys, and that these boys are the next generation of Indian footballers playing in the World Cup. So although slight leniency has been afforded to them, the successes have been great. We've scored our first ever World Cup goal at across any level. Jackson Singh, and as I said, the scenes in the stadium were absolutely magnificent when that happened. Colombia had actually ranked 10th in the world at the under-17 level, so to go toe-to-toe with the 10th ranked side, 0-0 at halftime and then 1-1 in the 81st minute is a big achievement in itself. To do that on such a big stage is no mean feat. Outstanding play by the USA, but down to defensive mistakes on our own end. So it's a positive and a negative sign at the same time, because it shows that had India played to their full potential, and that full potential does exist, then it would have been a much different result than the USA. So that's been one positive. Another positive has been the fact that football has for a change been reported on a nationwide scale in the national media and has been given prime importance. So the media is a major stakeholder in the growth of any sport, and especially of football in India. So it was very heartening to see the media actually rally behind the team and report about the tournament in the most positive manner that they could. So I'd say those have been some of the successes from the tournament. We have a question now from Aryan Mehta. Do we qualify if we win against Ghana? Aryan, if we beat Ghana by a margin of 3 goals, and if the USA beats Colombia by a margin of 2 goals, then we qualify as second place team. It's not impossible. Miracles have happened in football before, so you'd never put it past the Indian team to pull off something like that. Although, having said that, it will be extremely tough for that to happen. Anirudh then says, according to you, how can we tackle Ghana's physical game? By remaining organized as a side, by not committing too many players forward, at the same time not being meek or being scared, because we do need 3 goals to qualify. So India need to pick and choose their moments to bomb forward, and then hit Ghana on the counter attack. Basically, the Indians are actually deceptively strong and they've displayed that in this World Cup in their performances against Colombia and the USA, because the Colombian players were much bigger, taller and faster than the Indian players, but the Indian players were clever in terms of their defensive organization and in terms of how they just went into those one-on-one duels without really caring about what would happen to them, or without caring about not putting their bodies on the line. So that's one thing. Not committing to the Ghanaian players would also be another thing, because if you commit to a tackle, one is a possibility of making a foul, and the second possibility is that these Ghanaian players are very quick, so they might just be off on the counter, and it's then very hard to kind of chase them and keep up with them. So those are the 2 main things that India would need to keep in mind to counter Ghana's physical game. Right. I will now read out some quotes from the Indian manager Luis Norton de Matos, who was addressing the media yesterday ahead of the game, and he actually made a very interesting comparison with Portugal's youth setup and the similarities he saw between Portugal's youth setup and the Indian youth setup when he first made contact with the boys. He was asked a question about Portugal's qualification for the World Cup, and it was from that point on that he kind of took off on a tangent, and he spoke about Portugal's similarities with India. And he says Portugal's players in the 60s and 70s, those players were young players and they were shy when they played against foreign teams. Similar to the Indian players when I made contact with them for the first time. But we need to keep out the complex and not fear to play, because losing is not the worst thing in the world. We can lose to learn to win. Every game lost gives an opportunity to win in the future. India must think that the process can take 8 to 10 years, but these players must be the ones to guide the other boys coming in later, because they're a very strong unit. De Matos actually considered the job with the boys. He's more of a father figure to them than anything else, and it seems that the boys are really thriving under his leadership and guidance. So yeah, it would be good if De Matos was to keep his role in the side as head coach of the Indian team. Aburam Akiyama says Ghana 3, India 0. That's a possibility, of course that's a possibility, because Ghana is a very strong side, but India would actually need to beat Ghana by the exact same margin, except in their favour to ensure that they go through to the next round of the World Cup. So yeah, let's see what happens. Let's come to the strengths of the Ghanaian team. And as I mentioned before, that their creativity on the ball and their flair is something that's very hard to match against. Matos had also spoken of the same thing, and I'll read out a quote from him about the Ghanaian players' is physicality and unpredictability. He says that tomorrow is the most difficult opposition in the group for me because the fantasy of the African players is fantastic. We never know if the dribbles will be towards the left or the right. They are very fast, very strong. They've been 2 times world champions, although it was with another generation, but they play the same kind of football. There are similar points with Colombia if you see. The 2 wingers are very, very strong and they can decide the game. It's not a matter of whether you're organized or not because technically they are very, very good. Their 2 fullbacks left and right are very good because they can come forward and support the attack. I think there are more players in Ghana who can come and decide the game than there were in Colombia. They have 5 to 6 players who can be the difference with their speed, strength and skills. However, we know what they are about. Let's see tomorrow what the game gives to us as well. The aforementioned players that Mato speaks of are primarily Aminu Mohammed, who is actually on the books of Manchester City right now. He was picked up from the Wafa Academy in Ghana, and he is a prospect for world football to watch out for in the future. You have Sadiq Ibrahim on the other flank, who can have the same impact as Mohammed, and Eric Aya, who's the captain. Just slots right there in the midfield and plays those passes to the wingers. So those are the 3 players that India will need to keep an eye out for. If Anwar Ali does not start today's game as he was in conditional training yesterday, I would Kayam in the question of who replaces Amarjeet Singh Kayam, because he's been a never-present player. He's had a never-present slot in the midfield so far. So it'll be interesting to see who replaces Amarjeet Singh Kayam. Right, we have Anirudh who then asks, where do you think we may end up conceding goals? Which are the potential gaps that Ghana may take advantage of? Ninthoing Gamba Meite on the right flank will need to be a little more disciplined with his runs today, because he does have the tendency to bomb forward at every opportunity. Although so far in the last game against Ghana, against Colombia, I beg your pardon, he was disciplined, not so disciplined against the USA. So he needs to keep that consistent performance going. These Ghanaian wingers are very quick. They're very quick, and again, like I said, if we don't commit to any of the tackles or any of the tackles that Ghana invite us to make, then we'll be good. It'll stand us in good stead. Having said that, yes, like I mentioned before, it's not about just defending. It's not about just not wanting to concede goals, because India does need to score 3 goals, and the first goal will be extremely crucial in today's game, because the Matos had already said that if India went on to score against Colombia first, with Rahul KP's shot thundering against the bar, then the result could have been different, because the crowd would have then been behind India, and it would have been a completely different atmosphere altogether. The crowd were behind India for majority of the game. But yes, in the moments where you don't really know what the team is trying to execute on the pitch, the crowd can also get a little shifty, a little anxious. So that's something that India will need to ensure to not let happen. They'll need the crowd on their side today. So that's one area. If India do score first today, then I think it might actually be a miracle, and then we might be able to go on and score the other 3, because I've heard a few people who've seen Indian football for many a year now, and having the conversations with them in the press box and just interacting with them, they're of the opinion that this Indian team is actually way more entertaining to watch than the senior Indian team. And that's saying something. Sunil Chhetri himself had admitted to the fact that the kind of exposure that this Indian team has got, they didn't get when they were of the same age or when they were at the same stage of depth, are definitely going to have a bright future. They've been noticed. Dheeraj Singh, the goalkeeper, who's had a fantastic tournament, has been the find of the tournament so far, and it's the Under-17 World Cup. There are going to be a lot of scouts from across European leagues, South American leagues, Asian leagues, who are going to be coming and watching the games. So I wouldn't be surprised to see interest in these Indian players from at least some very good Asian leagues. Anirudh with another question says, based on your inputs, do you really think we could turn the game in our favor if we get a quick goal? Yes, I do believe we could turn the game in our favor if we get a quick goal. It all depends on that first goal. It's interesting also to see that India have actually played better after conceding the goal in both their games so far, even though against the USA they didn't get a goal back with Anwar Ali's shot, like I mentioned, hitting the crossbar. But yes, if India can play with the same intensity and desire as they do before actually conceding, then we might be in for a good result today. Right. I think it'll be a good time to talk about the fan support at the JLN Stadium so far. There were actually more fans that turned out to watch India's second group game of the World Cup than there were in the first group game, and Luis Norton Matos was himself extremely surprised by this, because he said, even though the atmosphere in the first game was fantastic, the fact that there are more people coming in watching the game in the second time that we've had so far in the tournament. Right. So, as I said, Amarjeet Singh, Qiyam and Anwar Ali are doubts for today's game. They'll be assessed before the game, and then we'll see what happens. One position where India does have an advantage of their discipline, like I mentioned. So with the Ghanaian players' creativity and how they leave their area and leave their positions, India can exploit them over there. I'm going to read out another quote from Luis Norton de Matos, who was quite expressive in his press conference yesterday. And he spoke on the emotion of seeing Jackson Singh score India's first ever goal in the World Cup. I had asked him whether it was one of the most emotional moments he'd ever experienced on a football pitch, and had there been any more emotional moments he'd experienced. And he told the media present over there that when he was coach of the Guinea-Bissau national team 19 to 20 years back, it was a similar moment where they had never qualified for the African Cup of Nations. They had actually not won a single competitive game in 19 or 20 games till that point. So in their first round of qualification, in their first game for the African Cup of Nations, they won 1-0 at home in what was a historic goal scored, and it was a historic victory for the whole team and the whole nation. And he says that was one of the moments that was very, very emotional for him on the football pitch, even though they did go on and lose all the rest of their games. He told the Guinea-Bissau Federation that these players are going to be the players that will form the core of the national team in the coming future, and they will qualify for the next African Cup of Nations. And that's exactly what happened with the Guinea-Bissau national team. So he expects the same to happen with the Indian team. He hopes the same to happen with the Indian team, as long as the processes are in place, as long as the players are giving it their all, as long as the coaches are informed about what's required, as long as all the processes are in place. India does have a bright future. He mentioned that as one of the most emotional moments in his football career. I'm going to read out what he said. And he was prone to making fouls, but the fact that hasn't happened so far in the tournament is a testament to how far he's come ahead in the tournament. We've also brought in a very experienced goalkeeping coach who came and trained with the Indian goalkeepers, and Luis Norton de Mato said that the improvement those players made under the goalkeeper at that time was massive, and his contribution to the whole system was massive. Right, I think we're back on now. I'm going to read out the quote by Matos on the emotion of seeing Jackson Singh score. And he said, "If I'm the coach of Brazil or England, it's different because I come with the pressure to win. It's normal if they win, but in India, if we take a point, it's something that belongs to us. I've enjoyed everything and been very, very happy with all the things that have passed in the country since March and all the things I've experienced. Against Ghana is a perfect opportunity to prove that they once again belong on the world stage." As Matos himself said that my motivation in this game is then to confirm the progress we've made in the tournament so far. If the first two games were confirmation of the fact that we can compete with the best on the world level, the last game should be confirmation of the fact that we can actually go ahead and beat them, and India will be going and taking onto the field with the very same motivation. Anirudh then again asks, as important as this tournament is for the under-17 scenario, which are the forthcoming events we should be looking forward to irrespective of today's result? Good news is that yesterday the Indian senior team beat Macau 4-1 at Bengaluru to qualify for the AFC Asian Cup, which will be held in the UAE in 2019. It's an absolutely historic victory prepared this time around to take on the big fishes of Asia. As Sunil Chhetri himself said that there need to be more competitive matches coming in the next 2 years for them to actually compete and give a much better account of themselves this time. That's one tournament to look forward to, the AFC Asian Cup 2019. There are suggestions that the Indian team might be kept together as a unit this time around after this tournament, despite interest from clubs, which will actually be a pity because a lot of clubs are showing interest in the Indian players, if the grapevine is to believe. In fact, a rumor that I heard was quite out there and to be taken with a pinch of salt was that Manchester United were actually scouting Komal Thattal. again, to confirm that, and then to place that kind of pressure on young shoulders on 17-year-old Komal Thatal would be unfair. But yes, it's a definite fact that Indian clubs are taking an interest. Good part for them, for these players, is that their motivations don't only lie to play in foreign leagues. Most of the players they've grown up watching have been Indian players, and they're very grounded that way, because they also know that if more and more people get involved in the Indian football movement at this point of time, it'll only strengthen the Indian league. And the long-term vision, of course, is then to see a strong Indian league with the merger of the I-League and the ISL, and a lot of these boys are going to be playing a part in that in the future. Jackson Singh actually publicly declared during the FIFA Under-17 World Cup draw ceremony back in... we've spoken about Ghana's players, we've spoken about the strengths that India has, we've spoken about the crowd, and I'm sure that a lot of you watching this live video right now would be tuning in at 8 o'clock to support the team. Go out to the stadium and support the team if you can, of course, because they need your support. Dheeraj Singh said that they'll need his team will need the crowd to be even louder than ever this time around. So if you get an opportunity, make it to the stadium, go watch the boys, and they won't disappoint you. Anirudh says, could we shed more light on the under-17 scene post this World Cup? Right. So, as of now, the plan was for the AFF to keep these boys together as a group and train together and not contracted with any other clubs, at least for the next 2 years. Although, having said that, once again, I find that a slightly unsustainable model, because if you have clubs that are showing interest in these players in good leagues, then it'll only benefit their development if they go out and play and they get more exposure. And Luis Norton de Matos has himself said that the players need more experience. They need more experience of playing in big competitions, because mistakes like the one against Colombia, where you conceded a goal immediately after scoring, where you just couldn't recover from the high and the exuberance and the exhilaration of scoring India's first goal in a FIFA competition. So it's that slight bit of experience that the boys will need to get in the future, and that will only happen if they compete in tournaments so far, and that will only happen if they get contracts with clubs. So the jury's still out on what's going to happen, but the future is bright for sure. So yeah, that's a wrap on today's live video on the ringside view with me, Suyash Upadhyay. It's going to be a good game. It's going to be a game where India will need to win 3-0 and depend on the results of the USA and Colombia game to make sure that they pass through to this next round of the Under-17 World Cup. But as I said before, miracles do happen in football. And